Welcome back everybody. Now surprisingly it's been 18 months since we took delivery of our brand new next gen Ranger, and I thought I should do an update on everything we like, what we don't like, a few things we've learned along the way, as well as a number of things to look out for. And I think this will be a really good update for anyone that's out there looking at a next gen Ranger, given that there's a fair few second-hand ones on the market now, or you're looking brand new, because there's a few tips and tricks and things we've learned along the way that I think you'll find really interesting. Now, I'm not going to tart it up with a clickbait title or anything like that. I like to do a nice, honest review. And so far, for the most part, we've actually been really happy with this purchase. But there are a few things to look out for, so come along as we show you what it's all about. So we went a ute this time over a wagon, just for the added practicality. Given where we live and how our life sort of works, we thought the ute tub might be a little bit better. So has it actually worked out that way? Well, we'll discover that through the video. But all in all, I actually think the Next Gen Ranger series has actually lasted quite well. Given it's been out for a number of years now, they're probably getting close to doing a midlife update with a few cosmetic mods and upgrades and stuff like that. Noting that Ford tends to do a lot of things every year, which is mainly taking features out, but that's another whole issue. And I think that looks-wise, performance-wise, and everything you get in this package has actually stood the test of time, even though it's fairly short at this time. If I was going to look for a ute right now, noting that the new Triton has come out, there's been an update to the D-Max, and a few of the other offerings out there, I think I would still go the Ranger, because if I was to put it in two words, it is firstly effortless with the V6, the auto for towing and everything around town. It's got oodles of power and it's extremely livable. Inside, it's just like being in a real car. Driving it is just like being in a normal car. And so far, we've actually been really happy with the purchase. It's done everything we needed it to do. But now we're starting to look at a few modifications now that we've got past that 18 months to 2-year period. So I'll also want to cover that in this video as well. But firstly, let's go over everything we like about this particular Ranger, how it's worked for us, and then I'm going to cover a few things I don't like, as well as a few other issues that are cropping up that you might need to be aware of. So let's get right into it. So while we're down this neck of the woods, the first thing I really love are these little side steps that go on the back of the tub. It makes it incredibly easy to actually step up. You grab onto these side rails, you can get onto the tailgate and into the tub, but more importantly, you can actually reach down into the tub just by standing on these. As opposed to the traditional utes where you've had to climb up on the rear wheels, all that sort of thing, it just makes it so much easier. But what else actually tickles my fancy? Probably this V6 badge here. One of the main factors that drew me to the Ranger was when they announced they were putting the V6 turbo diesel in the Next Gen Ranger. Given we do a lot of towing, that was a really big draw card, and so far, as I said just before, this engine has been effortless. The amount of power and smooth driving that you get from this, given that it's a diesel, is really good. Around town, it is fantastic. Fuel economy is not the best, which we'll cover a little bit shortly as well, but from a grunt point of view, it's got oodles. You can just quickly overtake, you can go on your on-ramps, and it's a lot of fun to drive around, to be honest, so it's not really a boring ute. And again, I'll do a little bit of a discussion while we're driving along with the caravan in tow, just to run you through a few features I like about that. And there's a few little niggling things I don't like as well. But generally, the V6 and 10-speed auto, it has been a game changer for us. There's a few things to look out for in the engine bay, which we'll get onto as well. So I'm just sort of giving a few little tidbits on what we'll go through in this video, but it makes a really fun vehicle. And talking about fun, I actually really love the color. It was something that I was sort of 50-50 on, but I'm really glad we chose the Luxe Yellow, just because it stands out, and when the sun actually comes out, it's got a real pop to it. And I did it a little bit deliberately because it does stand out in videos, thumbnails and stuff like that, but it just gives a little bit of life and energy to the ute as well. Now from a paint point of view, I know it's not perfect, but so far we haven't got too many chips, scratches or anything like that. It is obviously a very thin paint, and I am curious about how it's going to last long term. Now, if I was loaded up with cash when we took delivery of this, I would have got it color corrected and PPF wrapped. I think that would be the best solution for a ute that you're using even around town, because it stops a lot of little scratches and nicks that you might get on it. But more importantly, if you're traveling down the road, going up and down the highways all the time and doing a lot of off-road work, then the PPF wrapping makes a huge difference to the longevity of the paint finish on these vehicles. Outside of that, what I've done is I've done a DIY graphene coating on it. And then I've actually started using the Salty Captain wash, which has actually worked incredibly well. But what I'm going to do is actually keep up with the Turtle Wax graphene coating just to see how that goes. And I'll update you in a few years to see how that has actually preserved the paint, even though this vehicle is primarily garaged. Michelle does drive to work where it sits outside under trees and stuff like that. And so far we haven't seen any damage from tree sap, bird droppings or anything like that. But it's always a little bit of a concern. Now, another one of the things that I really like about the Ranger and probably all new vehicles is this radar cruise control. Being able to just set it up actually works incredibly well when you're just cruising up and down the highway. Now, we don't use it around town, but out on the open road, it's really, really good. I also don't use cruise control when I'm towing, but that's just my personal thing. However, I think if we got further out west, we'd probably consider using it along the flat roads. I'm just always cautious about how that can actually be a detrimental effect while you're towing because you haven't got that full control. The one thing I do with the radar cruise control, because I don't like the lane centering it does where it wants to auto drive you and fight you a little bit on corners, is I turn the auto lane centering off when I've got the radar cruise control on. The other thing to be mindful of, and I experience this all the time when we're driving between Surfers Paradise and Brisbane, because the drivers up there are a little bit crazy, is that even with the closer gap that you have on the adaptive cruise control, it's just enough for someone to squeeze in. So I'm always sort of looking around to sort of guess when someone's going to do that. And I'll sometimes just give it a little bit of a nudge to close that gap, or I'll just be wary that that's going to happen because obviously if someone squeezes in, it jams the brakes on and pulls you back to open that gap back up. It's a minor thing, but overall, I love all the new technology with adaptive cruise and everything like that. It works extremely well. And for the most part, we've never had an issue with it. It is pretty well tuned, given that this is a ute, but I think it takes in all the Ford technology and research they do. It has, out of the box, been really, really, really good. Now, a little handy tip and trick for those that aren't aware. If you lock your car and you notice the lights on one side are still on, that is because you've left the left or right hand indicator on. So if that's left on and not in the neutral spot and you lock the vehicle, your lights on the outside will stay on pretty much forever. So while this is an annoying little feature, it's handy if you are actually parked somewhere and you need to have lighting on one side. And while we're talking about the key fob, did you know you can auto open and close your windows from the key fob? To open them, you just double click and hold. And they go down just like that. And then to close them automatically using the key fob, you just hold the lock button in. Got to hold it in for a little bit longer than you think. It's around about 3 seconds. And just like that, you can open and close all the windows using your key fob. It's a pretty handy thing, particularly in summer. Or if you're camping, something like that. Or you just got your car outside and you need to close the windows because it started to rain. You can hold the lock button and that'll instantly close them up for you. It's a handy thing to have. Now, I just did a video on towing mirrors, but overall, I'm really happy with the tech that goes into the mirrors. The 360-degree cameras are really, really handy, including the frontal one when you're doing off-road driving. Just being able to put that on works extremely well. The only thing, which we'll get into once we go inside, is navigating all the menus to turn off some of the alarms and stuff like that. But overall, the 360-degree cameras, they make a really big difference because you can really check around you, particularly when you're reversing into tight car parks, stuff like that. And more importantly, on the rear, being able to flick on the tailgate camera has been a really good thing, particularly when we've got the bike sitting on the bike rack or we're towing. You can actually flick this on and quickly see what's going in behind you below the window line. Given that sometimes on the tub rack, we've got stuff up there, it's a really good thing being able to see behind you while you're driving along, just to check how everything's going. Now I'm going to touch on that while I'm down here because the 4-bike rack that we have on our journey that we do actually put onto the ute as well, I did have an issue with it rotating on this ball. So what I've actually done is I bought a Mr. Hitches square or fixed attachment so the ball can't rotate on the hitch itself, and that has made a really big difference to how that works on the back of the ute. Just thought I'd add that as a little bit of feedback on our 4-bike carrier for anyone that's interested. If you do have an issue with them rotating around, it's worked pretty well. Just means you get a new ball that has the straight sides on it. the little adapter that goes over the tongue, make sure you get the right width to suit your particular ton, and it works extremely well. Now you note that it's actually still pretty much stock, apart from these few little extras that we've put on. Out of the box, I actually think the suspension is really, really good for everyday driving. Now, if we're going to start using this off-road a little bit more, it does have a few deficiencies. Towing, I think it's passable. And to be honest, when I first put the van on, I thought it was a little bit soft because we were coming from a four-wheel drive with stiffer suspension with airbags in the rear that we actually fitted for our last Cairns trip. So it took a little bit to get used to, but now that we've actually done a fair few trips with the van in tow, it tows really, really nice. And it's something I've been really doing a lot of research on how we go about updating the suspension in this, just because it rides so well straight out of the box. You don't want to destroy the day-to-day driving of this because it is actually really, really comfortable. You can just jump in it, drive to Brisbane, and that's why the other night when we had the storm go through here, I just went, look, we're going to jump in the car. We got back here at 6:30 in the morning, so I drove straight through the night in probably some of the worst driving conditions I've ever done, and it wasn't tiring at all. However, I do want the look, so I do want to change the wheels, put some bigger tyres on, change the suspension, probably change these side steps because we'll get into that later on, given that my thoughts about it on where we're going to take it have probably changed a little bit as well. Now inside, this is actually a really nice place to be, and we haven't got too many qualms. I just asked Michelle what her top favourite bits and pieces about the Wildtrak are. She said storage. So in here, there is a lot of storage. She didn't even know this existed until a few weeks ago. So we got this little storage nook here. That is really good just to quickly pop things in when you're out at the beach and stuff like that, just keep them out of view. This is great just to put phones and bits and pieces on while you're traveling along. The wireless charger, I'm 50-50 on, but from a connectivity point of view, we haven't actually had too many dramas at all. Now I know a lot of people have. I think it just depends on your particular phone, its updates, and generally just the build of the particular ute. So it's very hit and miss. So just being able to use all the Android Auto bits and pieces, Spotify, all of that has made doing long trips in particular really, really easy. The dual zone climate control is actually really, really handy. And for those that haven't discovered it, the dark screen mode of the main screen actually works really, really well. It blends it in with the instrument cluster, and it means you don't have that big bright white sort of glow, particularly at night time when you're driving along. The other thing to note as a tip and trick is if you're driving along and you actually want to see what gear the vehicle's in, you can actually press one of the manual buttons on the side and that'll bring up the display down the bottom and show you what gear it's actually in. The other really handy thing, which is a bit of a tip and trick, is for those that haven't played around with the zone lighting, you can actually do it through the interface on the screen here, as well as through the app. So there's a lot of different ways to actually navigate and get through to all the different screens, including the four-wheel drive or the off-road screen. Just behind the stop-start button, press that. That brings up the forward camera, and also some of the other settings you can do to actually manipulate and change the settings while you're four-wheel driving and stuff like that. But there's a lot of tech in here that you can learn and really get into. The over-air updates I have found to be actually quite practical and easy to use. If they come up just before we do a trip, I will ignore them. I don't want to change anything before we do a trip, but if we're just around town, it comes through, we'll quickly do that. So the fact that Ford is introducing those over-air updates makes life a little bit easier. Otherwise, from my point of view, they can just be done when you take it in for a service. The back seats are pretty good on long trips. The only thing I find a little bit tricky is actually lifting the seat up to get access to any of the storage bits and pieces underneath, but having the rear air conditioning makes a huge difference. And again, that's just a small improvement we've had over our previous vehicles, makes it a lot more comfortable. Now, one of the major pros of a ute over a wagon is that it cools down really fast in here over summer. So that's another thing we've noticed. The cooling package, given it's just a dual cab ute, works incredibly well. And to be honest, it's just the small things, but the sail plane on the Wildtrak and the Platinum models, it actually provides a lot of sun protection as well. So while it looks cool on the outside, I think from a functional point of view, it provides a lot of shade while you're traveling along and sitting out in those hot summer months. It's holding up really, really well, but there are a few little issues with plastics and technology, which we'll touch on very shortly. Now, one thing we haven't actually used from the premium pack is all these switches over top, but I think eventually we'll get to use them. And the fact that it's all pre-wired through the vehicle, everything is labeled. And I think that's where all these manufacturers are going. It's about making it easy for people to do little DIY mods, add accessories and stuff like that, without having to actually hack into the system itself. Now, I'm going to be honest that when we went in to order the Ford Ranger, we went in looking at a Sport without the roller shutter because we were looking at putting a canopy topper on the tub itself, just for extra storage and stuff like that. But one of my favorite features of the Wildtrak is actually the roller shutter. Now, the one little hesitation I had on the roller shutter is that they did previously have a tendency to leak. This has been rock solid. We haven't had any water inside the tub, to the point where, and I'll cover this later on in the video, most of our fit out lives in the back of the ute all the time, just because it's so practical, and I'm not worried about water getting inside. So the roller shutter, if I was going to order another ute, I'd probably still consider that. It just comes down to how you're using it. And we'll get on to the tub rack and all that sort of thing very, very shortly, but one of my favorite things does tend to be the roller shutter on the Wildtrak, because it just provides that flexibility. Even though we've got a tub rack on here and people say, why do you have a tub rack? You know, why don't you just put a canopy on? Well, it's having those multiple layers that you can actually store and stack things in that works incredibly well. And the roller shutter for day-to-day use is actually a really good thing. It stays pretty cool in there, to be honest, which was another consideration we had in the ute versus wagon. It does obviously get a little bit hotter because it's not air conditioned, but it's not nearly as bad as what I thought. And I think that's primarily attributed to the silver finish of the roller shutter. Obviously, it is going to get hot in there, but it's actually not too bad. And one thing I have to add to my favorite list is obviously towing. How this actually tows has been really, really surprising, to be honest, for a stock vehicle. As I mentioned before, the suspension's a little bit soft, but out of the box, it works incredibly well. But before I insert a little clip that I did while I was driving with the caravan on the other day, while we were doing the tow mirror video, I just want to add a few little bits and pieces I've thought of after that. Now, obviously, one of the big benefits of the Ranger over the Y62 that we were also considering at the time was the fact that it comes with a full tow package. So you got the tow bar, you got the integrated brake controller, and that whole system really, really appealed to me. Now, that has worked incredibly well. Being able to set up all your different trailers, bits and pieces. We even have the bike rack as a trailer so that you can set up and work all the blind spots, and it doesn't go a little bit crazy when you plug in the cord. So we've got the lights working on the end of the bike rack. Just all those little features make a really big difference. Now, the one thing that I wish Ford did put in, given that they've put in pre-wired bits and pieces for pretty much everything, is some kind of high voltage or heavier cable to the back so you can set up an Anderson plug and bits and pieces like that. That to me would be a really, really good thing, given that it's very easy to do from the factory, and that a lot of us actually retrofit in heavier cable to the back, given that it's got the built-in tow package to power up our caravans and stuff like that. Those little things would make a really big difference. Now, the other thing that Ford has recently changed with their MY24 models is that the infotainment screen inside is now a lot more compatible to plug in your rear view cameras that are on the back of your caravans and stuff like that. Up until this point, which was pretty much halfway through last year, you actually had to buy an $1,000 adaptation kit to actually make all those cameras work into the infotainment system without having to put separate screens and stuff like that in. So we're currently stuck with that. Doesn't worry me too much, but I do think with the newer models, it's so good that everything integrates so seamlessly. So while that's not one of my favorites, I wish I had it. I think for anyone that's looking at the new models and you are doing towing, the fact that they're setting these vehicles up for towing makes a really big difference. I suppose while I'm on that, with my little wish list, if they offered maybe a slightly stiffer rear suspension upgrade when you're ordering to take into account the towing and maybe a little bit of extra weight in the tub, I think that would be really nice as well. And honestly, if they just had the Wildtrak X in the V6, it would be a sales killer, because that would actually tick off a lot of the little issues that I've got and little upgrades that we typically need to do to these utes for everyday use, if we're not just driving around town and using it as a soccer mum's car. But for now, let me just insert the little clip that I did while we had the journey in tow, and I'll run through what I like about towing with this particular Ranger. So one question I'm sure a lot of people have had is, what are these like to tow with, given that we essentially bought the Ranger to tow with in the first place? It has been fantastic. It's so powerful and smooth. To the point where I always use the example going up through Kalungaluk. You've got the Rangers there, Bullet Hiller's the same. It just powers straight up. And the big thing about the 10-speed auto in the V6, as compared to, say, a 5-speed and the 3-litre or the 3.2 in the Pajero, is that it doesn't kick back. It might kick back 1 or 2 gears, but you don't really notice it. It has been fantastic. It's such an enjoyable vehicle to drive for long distances, towing a caravan like what we're doing here today. A little bit of a firm up with the suspension would be okay, but if you're going to do a lot of off-roading, so you're going to fit a lot larger tyres, more aggressive tyres, then that's going to change the dynamic when you're actually towing in one of these vehicles. So right now, as it comes out of the box, it is really, really nice. Now, fuel figures wise, we seem to average around about 11.6. Every time I jump in this, it's 11.6, which is a mixture of roads sort of like this where we travel all the time. We do a lot of trips up the coast, or we have been doing a lot of trips up the coast. A few trips to Queensland. The trip meter is currently on 6,071 kilometres and it's got 11.6. But towing, I'd say we'd average, and I have actually reset the trip meter, which is what you should do when you're starting to tow, and we do average around 17 litres per 100. With this van, it's loaded up to around about 2.5 tonne, and we've got about 240 kilos on the ball when we've got the bikes on the caravan as well. At the moment it's fairly empty because I'm just doing a video showing how the tow mirrors work, but it's so far it's been really, really impressive, and I'm certainly not disappointed at all. Now, one thing to note with these is that they do have a tow mode. So the tow haul in these is probably where I give it a bit of a con. I find it super duper aggressive with its gearing. So if you're going down particularly steeper descents, I'd much prefer to use it with the manual gearing, because I just find it goes back about 3 or 4 gears too many. That's the one time you do notice it kicking back. And I think Ford could probably actually fine tune that a little bit. I don't think it needs to be quite so aggressive. And it's the same thing when you come up to an intersection, slowing down, it kicks you right back. So I have a tendency not to use that. We do tow in 2H. We could tow in 4A, and if it was wet, we probably would tow in 4A. The one thing I noticed about 4A is that even though it says it'll swap around, I can feel it driving the front wheels more than it not driving the front wheels. So when it's in 4A, it's probably in 4H more than anything. I do tend to drive fairly moderately with the van on. I don't hoon along at 120 kilometres an hour. I do generally try to stick around that 100. But when you do need to overtake and you don't want to slow people down, you can just go around people with no dramas at all. And that's where the hills come into play as well. But the V6, touch wood, has been fantastic so far, and I wouldn't have gone by turbo, particularly given that we're towing a fair bit, and that's what this vehicle is for outside of everyday duties. But off-road, I've actually been pretty impressed. We haven't done a huge amount, I'll be frank and honest there, but we did actually do a pretty gnarly off-road day when we went to Jayco Newcastle's weekend up at Mount Seaview. And given this was a fairly new vehicle, it was a little bit scary, to be honest, because we didn't want to go and dent and scratch it up. We actually found the ground clearance was probably the biggest issue, but actually working through, running it in low range, using the locker, all that sort of thing, it was actually incredibly capable just as a standard ute. Now, I think if I was using this more regularly off-road, definitely needs a lift, definitely needs better tyres, and obviously wheels. And I would get rid of these side steps and probably put some rock sliders on. Because the one thing about these utes is they are quite long. So the wheelbase between the front wheel and the back wheel, you've got to deal with that ramp over angle when you're doing a lot of off-roading and stuff like that. And I come from having a Pajero where their four-wheel drive system is really, really good. I think a lot of people discount that because they're not aware of it. And I would say that this is right up there with the Super Select out of the Mitsubishi system. It carries over a lot of the characteristics in how Ford has got this new system working. And for me, it makes me feel right at home. And I think if we actually wanted to convert this and start using it more as an off-road vehicle, it would be really, really capable for that. At the moment, I'm sitting on the fence, and we'll get onto that towards the end of the video. But all in all, I would say that this has been the practical vehicle we were looking for. The storage and the practicality has worked incredibly well on the Ranger. probably more than we actually expected, which has actually changed our mind on how we're using this while we've gone over a few little transformations over the last 12 to 18 months. So if I was to rate it, I would give it at least a 9, maybe a 9.5 out of 10. But there are a few dislikes that I've got, which we'll start running through now. But firstly, I just want to cover off one other semi-favourite item, which actually goes into the dislikes. Then we'll go through everything we don't like, a few things to look out for, and the future plans for this particular ute. The Matrix headlights probably finish off the overall package that Ford's got with all their technology, modern bits and pieces, and a lot of it can be contributed to a modern vehicle. So the Matrix headlights, they're a really interesting thing. When you're driving along, you can actually see them go up and down and get brighter and duller, but we do constantly get flashed by other drivers. Now, Michelle drives this most of the time and she's said the same thing, given we do a bit of out of town driving between where we live here and to where the boys play soccer and all that sort of thing, where she's ferrying them backwards and forwards. And she said she is constantly flashed by drivers who think we have our high beam on. So while the Matrix headlights are good, they're a little bit annoying that I don't think they quite flash down far enough on the driver's side with that oncoming traffic. And it might be a case that with truck drivers, they're sitting a little bit higher and it's just reflecting at that wrong height into their line of sight. So one thing I did do, and I probably will start doing, which is sort of taking the Matrix factor out, is just dipping those high beams down because they're not working how I want it, and I don't like aggravating other drivers, particularly truck drivers, while they're out doing their day-to-day job. Now, we mightn't be using these correctly, so put a few comments down below on whether or not the auto function needs to have a bit of adjustment, or if that's something we should raise with Ford when it goes in for its 30K service, because I'd be really interested with other people's experiences with these Matrix headlights from that point of view. Now, they're extremely expensive. And one thing I didn't put on the option list when we went through, given we were keeping it fairly simple, was headlight protectors. If I was ordering this now, I would definitely get dealer fitted headlight protectors, and that's one thing I'm looking at right now. Given we do a fair bit of out of town driving, we really should put headlight protectors on these, just to protect both the lenses from rock crashes and all that sort of thing, but also ensure that we're not having to replace this down the track. For the main part, that's why we got the bull bar put on. So if we do have an animal strike, it's actually protecting this frontal area, because really with new vehicles, they do crumple up quite a lot. And my thoughts are, even though I do keep a good lookout, if I do happen to hit a little wallaby or a roo or something like that, this is the first point of protection. Now with the ARB bull bar we've got fitted here, I'm actually really impressed with the finish of it. The ARB bull bar we had on the Pajero, the finish was absolutely terrible. And I was a little bit 50-50 on how this new finish would go, but just before we actually took delivery, ARB changed it so it's more of this matte finish rather than the textured finish they had on the original release of these bull bars. Now, the one thing I don't particularly like is all the little mesh and sort of fiddly features, which actually tie in really well with the Ford design and styling, but they are an absolute pain to clean. So if I take you to the frontal area, we can start getting into a few little bits and pieces if you're doing a lot of out of town driving with these particular vehicles. And this would apply if you're out west and up north where there's a lot of insects and bugs around. This grille is fairly open, so you do tend to get a lot of bugs on the front of the condenser. So there are actually a number of manufacturers out there that provide an inner mesh that you can actually fit to the front end of these vehicles. Now, you need to be a little bit careful that you're not cutting down on the cooling. And in one way, that's why I don't have driving lights fitted. We don't really need them. We don't have that purpose. I'm not just going to put them on as an accessory. So for me, it actually means we've got a really good, efficient cooling package, given that we're towing quite a bit. But getting back onto the design of the ARB bar, it does have this sort of hexagonal sort of grille mesh that's fitted to all their new bull bars. And while it looks fantastic, it is a fiddly thing to clean. I think with the front end of the vehicle, the sleeker it is, the easier it is to clean. And that's just a practical thing I've come up with to add into this video. But all in all, I actually really like the ARB bar, how it integrates all the radar and everything. Given that it's a Ford co-developed sort of package using their standard bar, I think it works really well. But if you are doing a lot of driving where you're coming across insects and stuff like that, consider getting a mesh put inside just to protect your inner cooling package so it's not getting all blocked up with bugs and stuff like that. Now, this isn't a dislike per se, but it's just a consideration. Even though these vehicles are fitted with all-terrain or off-road tyres, they're certainly not the best. You have to be really careful with these if you're using them in a stock form and you're out bush. The sidewalls are really prone to punctures, so you just have to be careful where you're going if you're going down really rocky roads or with areas with exposed roots and stuff like that, because you can tear these tyres up really quickly. If we were going to start doing some more outback touring, which the plan is for this particular ute, we will update to some much better all-terrain tyres. I'm not going to go mud terrain, but I will go an aggressive all-terrain. And obviously my three choices would be the Maxxis Razors, you've got the Falcon Wild Peaks, and we actually had the Nitto Ridge Grapplers on our Pajero, which I absolutely loved. We'll run these down, seeing though they're probably 30% worn at this point, and then we'll do a tyre upgrade once these are getting near the point of being replaced. Now the side steps for a standard vehicle probably aren't too bad, to be honest, but there are a few little things with the external plastics that I just want to raise. Obviously, if we're going to modify this vehicle, this will be one of the first things I change. Because the steps are very vulnerable, they hang out a long way and they sit quite low. For a town car, they're probably fine, but these will definitely need to be upgraded. But the plastics themselves, while I like the look of the plastics on the wheel arches and stuff like that, particularly with the Lux Yellow, I think the color coded on the Lux Yellow is a little bit too much in some respects. They are potentially going to fade down the track. Now, a few people have had problems with particularly the rear bumperette plastics fading, and these are incredibly hard to clean. It's the texture in them to actually go over. So I use plastic protectant to keep the, the nice look on them. It is really hard to go over the plastic on these, and particularly that little side step on the tub, to actually clean them off. So if you get mud and dirt on them, they are actually quite hard to clean. The back tub step actually seems to be made out of a different material. It's more like a recycled plastic, but it's really aggressive to try and clean and keep looking good. That's a minor con, but it's just something to note with the external plastics. And that takes me into the internal plastics and a few little issues in there. So let's go back inside. Might be a bit bright, so I'll film it later on, but while we're talking about plastics, there's a few little considerations and issues inside as well that you need to be aware of. Now, let's get into a few of the things I don't like about the interiors and a few things to look out for. I really don't like this shifter. To be honest, because I don't drive it all that much, if I'm in a hurry to reverse where there's people stuck behind me, it doesn't have a gate that locks it into reverse. And for me, that is really annoying. The other thing I don't particularly like, but I think it's something I'm getting used to, is how the manual shifter works. I wish you just had the gate you go across and just use it as like a Tiptronic up and down. The buttons on the side, you do get used to, but my primary gripe with the shifter is the fact that if you're a little bit flustered and you're trying to get out of people's way, you can really quickly just skip past reverse and go straight into park. And it's kind of annoying. If you're conscious of it, I'll sometimes just go from drive to neutral. So I just wish it just had that detent or that lock into reverse and then it went into park. Other than that, I mean, that's a minor thing. Now, the big thing that people need to be aware of, and we're not quite sure where it's going, is that a lot of these interior plastics are turning blue. And it's something that Ford does seem to be addressing. Now, I'll give Ford a big tick for actually jumping onto and addressing a lot of the issues that have come through. And we'll talk about that once we actually get into the under bonnet area. But the plastics do have an issue where they're fading and turning blue. Now, the general consensus is that the UV protectant that they've put on from the factory when these plastics are made wasn't all satisfactory for the Australian conditions and the UV light. It's really hard to tell. I'm not quite sure if we've got the issue or not, but I suspect that most of the models up until MY24, when I think they've actually addressed that, will have issues with the plastics inside fading and going a blue color. Now, where I think it is an issue is that even if you have your windows cracked down a little bit and you get some water on the side plastics, I noticed from day one that they actually do go blue when the water gets on them. So if you get any moisture on them, they tend to go from the charcoal to the blue. So that to me suggests there is a bit of an issue there. So hopefully Ford addresses that. Another issue that a few owners are having is obviously the Pillar Rattle, and they've tried a few different fixes for that. So I don't think we have it. One of our weather shields I think actually rattles a little bit, which I keep forgetting to raise in a service. But the Pillar Rattle and these plastics seem to be the main issues inside. apart from some of the connectivity issues that people have with the infotainment system. My other pet hate inside the new Rangers is obviously the stop-start system. Now you can actually buy a little adapter harness that reverses how the system works. So your stop-start button, actually you press that to enable stop-start. So it actually flips how the system works. But I tend to not want to hack into brand new vehicles, so I tend to just hit that button every time I get in, to the point where I jump in my work van and go to do the same thing, but obviously that button's not there. It's a minor thing, and I know it's to do with emissions, but that to me is a little bit annoying. Other than that, we did have a little thing there for a few weeks where it kept wanting us to put our hand on the steering wheel. That seems to have been resolved with an over-air update. It was just a little thing it did for a few weeks. We really haven't had any other issues, to be honest. Now, I don't know where to put this, but from the four-wheel drive selector modes, I find it reasonably good, but if you are going out for the first time, really familiarise yourself with the system. You do need to go through a few menus, in particular to turn off all the monitoring on the front, otherwise it's going to beep and drive you crazy. You also have to go through a bit of a menu system to find the diff lock. So it's not quite as intuitive as it could be with just a button to turn the diff lock on and off, but I would give it maybe a 70 to 80% from an integration point of view. Really, it's pretty easy once you learn all the little tricks and systems and ways to get in to actually turn things off. But just know that you need to turn a fair few things off because of the technology in these vehicles before you go off-road, just to make life a lot easier. I'll put that down as a very minor dislike, but it's not a major thing at all. It could just be improved within the interface of the infotainment system. Under the bonnet, and I'll admit I very rarely pop this up, hence I haven't bothered about fitting struts or anything like that. It's been pretty good, to be honest. We haven't had any dramas at all. However, the risk always with the V6 was the fact that it was based on the Lion engine that was used in Land Rovers and stuff like that. Now, I took it as an advantage because it was redeveloped and fully re-engineered by Ford when they used it in the F-150 over in the US. There's been a bit of controversy and people always saying they removed from the F-150 because it wasn't reliable. That was never the case. It's the fact that it's a small capacity diesel, and in the US, they prefer the petrol. If you go a diesel, you're going the large capacity power strokes that they have in their larger F250s and 350s, everything like that. But there are a few issues to be aware of. Firstly, a lot of the earlier versions had issues with the oil drain, and that was where it was leaking and it was defective. Now, Ford has done, it's seemingly a fairly good job in addressing that. They've been replacing the oil drain lines as they've been leaking, and they've come up with a few different revisions of that. Now, I'm not 100% convinced it's fully resolved, to the point if we do a trip out west, I'm actually going to buy a spare one just in case. I don't want to get stuck out there because once that starts leaking, and if it goes big time, then you're stranded out there, potentially at a dealer while they're waiting for the part to come in. Look, that's just me doing a bit of a risk analysis. You probably don't really need to worry about it. And obviously, Ford are revising all these things to address the problems. Now, there has been another consideration that's come out, is that these have a bit of a different belt system. So they run belts on the rear, and the timing pulleys that run to the heads, I believe, they have been known to break even in these ranges. So I don't think it's all that common, but it has happened from time to time. It's just something that is a potential risk, but I wouldn't say it's really bad. The other thing that people have noted is that these V6s develop a bit of a rattle. Now, to me, that's not, again, a big issue because these similar or the same family of engine has been run in the territory in the 2.7 litre format for a number of years. A lot of them developed a rattle, which is a little bit of a, almost like a timing chain rattle on startup. So it's for, 20 to 30 seconds on startup, and they've been 100% reliable. So if you do start getting that rattle, obviously raise it with Ford. I think you need to document any issues with anyone. If you're building a house, anything, if you keep a record and raise it with the manufacturer or who you're working with, if it comes to the point of a really big failure, you'll have the upper hand because you've got that recorded documentation. So if it's anything, if you are having an issue, make sure you raise it with the dealer and record it down, just in case. And that really applies to any make and model. But so far, I think they've been fairly reliable. I don't really have any issues, but I will have an oil drain as a spare if we do some remote touring, just in case. Now, another little issue that came out with some of the earlier versions was the drive shaft vibration. That seems to be pretty much resolved from a standard vehicle point of view. However, do note if you do put a suspension lift in the Rangers, that the drive shaft is susceptible to some vibration from going out of alignment. So if you are looking to put a lift in one of these Rangers, it's important to fit the shims in to keep the drive shaft alignment all nicey nice so you don't have any vibrations when you're driving down the road. One thing I'll also note that we actually just got a letter for, and that'll be rectified the next time this goes in for a service, is that Ford has put a notice out to upgrade the dipstick. Given that some people have been overfilling them because the dipstick reads a little bit low. Now, there's a general rule of thumb with most modern vehicles that you need to let them sit for at least 15 minutes before you check your oil levels. The service announcement that Ford puts out will make an adjustment to that, so I think people aren't necessarily overfilling them, and that could lead to further issues that they might have encountered down the track with some of those other things that I mentioned just before. Now, while we're out here as well, I also want to quickly touch on fuel usage. Now, fuel economy wise, to be honest, I don't monitor it that much at all. It's just what we sort of see on the trip computer. The tip and trick I've got is if you're doing a particular trip and you want to work out your fuel mileage, reset the trip meter, because otherwise it's a cumulative total that you'll see there. And particularly if you've been driving around town or doing other driving without towing, you'll think you're getting really good fuel mileage. For example, the first trip we did with the caravan, it was saying we were getting 13 litres per 100. Now, we all know that's probably not right with a 2.5 tonne caravan behind a dual cab ute. In reality, we are actually averaging with the caravan 17 litres per 100. And most people in the real world instance are seeing between 17 and 19 litres per 100, depending on the weight and size of your caravan and the conditions that you're driving in. But I find it fairly consistent, to be honest. Now, around town, as I'll say in that video as well, the trip meter generally for mixed use is sitting around 11.5 litres per 100. On the highway, we get down to around 9.9, maybe 9.5 on a trip up to Brisbane and back if we're not towing, noting that we still have a reasonable amount of luggage in the tub as well. But I would say generally on a highway, we're sitting around 10 litres per 100. If we're around town, you're probably doing around about that 11 litres, maybe 12 litres, depending on how the average works out. So it's certainly not a frugal machine, but given the power and all the other benefits that go with the V6, I'm pretty happy with that. The one thing I'll note here is that these fuel figures are pretty much the same as what we're getting out of our Pajero, with the 33s on it, the lift, and everything that went on that as well. So the one consideration here is when we go to upgrade this with some larger tyres, I think I at least want to go 33s on this again, just because that's a good size for some reasonable off-roading, giving you some ground clearance with say a 2-inch lift. Once you add that in, it's actually going to make that worse again. So I need to be really conscious if we're going to be using this primarily for outback towing, that we don't go too crazy with it, because the more you add on, the higher the fuel economy is going to be. What we found with the Pajero was most of the upgrades that we put onto that increased the fuel economy or the fuel usage by about 1.5 litres per 100, and I would expect roughly the same here. So particularly if we're doing long distance trips with the caravan, we've got a bit more load on, we've got larger tyres, bits and pieces like that, I would expect this to be then averaging around about 19 litres per 100. If we go a bigger van, we could creep up further towards the 20 litres. Now that still sits below your V8 Land Cruisers, your Y62 Patrols and stuff like that, so I don't have too many issues. It's a good middle ground, I think, where you've got the power, you've got the modern vehicle, all that sort of thing, without having a highly strung 4-cylinder turbo diesel, which is what I was trying to avoid when we purchased this. But that's just a little bit of a background into the engine, reliability and fuel usage side of things that we've experienced so far. Now, I still haven't actually got around to dropping the hood lining and putting some insulation on the underside of the roof that I raised in a few videos. And I did actually look at dropping this awning down. However, the brackets I got that run off the Rhino roof racks, they actually sat the awning too low and it hit on the door seals when you open and close the door. But I just wanted to touch on the Bluetooth because that's what all the issues around the awning, the roof racks and stuff related to was the noise you got through the Bluetooth. It looks like Ford's rectified that. I've spoken to Michelle on the phone quite a few times in the recent few months and haven't really noticed the noise issue at all. I'm sure she's been driving in the rain as well, and that seems to have all been resolved where you heard that real heavy hammering on the roof while you're talking on the phone. So again, that's another plus for Ford, where they're addressing and refining all these little issues that people are coming across. And as opposed to Nissan, where they tend to duck their head in the sand, I think that's a really good thing. Now, if you're out and about and camping, which we've done in this Ranger quite a few times now, particularly with the rooftop tent, one thing you'll notice is that it just bips and carries on and makes noises the whole entire night. So one of the important things to do is actually get a Faraday cage for the key. The first couple of times I took this out, I actually wrapped the key up in foil because, to be honest, someone can actually unlock this if you're sleeping in the rooftop tent because it's in close proximity to the vehicle. It's just a minor thing, but it'll actually help settle the vehicle down. If you put your key in a cage, so it's not talking to the key all the time and trying to work out what it's doing, that makes a really big difference. I've got some in my camping setup, but I can't find them. So I'll put a link below to some I got from Amazon. They work pretty well, to be honest. And that's the other thing I've noticed when I'm washing it. I'll generally have the key sitting on the table in the alfresco so that I'm not locking it and unlocking it where I've got the key in my pocket the whole time. But that takes me on to this whole rear setup because I want to answer a few questions there. I've been really slack with the YouTube comments and I do apologize for that. I'm just extremely busy. I run a business doing this. We've got a lot of other things going on. I've been doing some drafting as well and I just haven't had the time or mental capacity to go in there and address all those questions and answer them because I generally go off and do a bit of research for a lot of the responses as well. I need to get in there and respond to a lot of them, but I want to cover off a lot to do with this back end in this video to sort of say where we're going and how it's working so far. So let's get into that. Now I'll start with this little rear fit out that I did when we first got the Ranger. It's a very basic fit out. And my original thinking at that point in time was that it would only go in when we're going camping. And for most of the time, we just have the rubber liner in here and we'd use the tub as it is. Now what we've discovered, due to the convenience really, and that we don't really need so much storage space, is that this stays exactly how it is. I haven't touched it for this video. This is how it lives for 90% of the time. It's very rarely I'll take the fridge out. It's only because I bought some random thing off Marketplace and I need the width in the tub that I'll quickly take the fridge out. I actually take the fridge out on the slide with the EcoFlow on it and then put that other single piece back in so we've got a full carpeted rear area. So for the most part, we actually leave it as the carpeted area and it works so well that our friends who also upgraded to a Ranger got me to build a very similar setup. So what I did in that case is we use the same fridge slide. We've actually put an aluminium infill in there so they can sit their angle on it. And he uses a Blue Eddy or a Blue T AC180. So that actually works incredibly well and it pretty much duplicates the setup that we've got in here, other than he doesn't have the removable panel. So the fridge slide is essentially fixed into place. That works perfectly for them. Because we've discovered in all our traveling around, we actually have oodles of storage space in here. So the tub itself has worked extremely well for our particular use, to the point where we still have this in the back with all our random bits and pieces in there. I'll get rid of that so I can show a little bit more. And then obviously we've got the roller shutter that opens up so you've got really good access into the back. Now I'm opening that up because I've had a few questions in regards to these tub racks. Why do you even put that on? Well, to be honest, there's two really good features I love about this tub rack. The first thing is, because it sits really low, we can actually keep our setup fairly compact. So I'll put all sorts of things on here depending on what we're doing. I've actually adapted the rooftop tent onto this particular rack, which you'll see here. And if anyone's interested, I'll do a video on how I've actually mounted that onto the tub rack. It might be a fairly user-specific thing. However, I have come up with a little bit of a adaptation, some rails, and a bit of a system to get that to work on this particular tub rack. So outside the rooftop tent, I quite often have a waterproof bag up here. And what we've done is we've put all our stand-up paddle boards, kayaking bits and pieces all inside that bag, and it gets thrown on when we go away and do a trip. We put the kids' kayaks up on here. It is extremely handy by providing that 2-level storage when you're out and about camping. Another really good thing that we'll do once we start using our little mini camper trailer is that I'll start putting the swags on here. Plus we've got that storage box, and I've got a plan for that to turn it into a mobile outdoor kitchen. So that's a project that's coming up as well. So it's a real flexible storage system for us. It's really easy to reach. The fact that you can lift this up just like that, and that's where these steps come into play. You can still reach in, grab everything from inside the tub. It is a really handy and convenient option, to the point where it's actually changed how I think I want to use this ute down the track. I'd really like to get a smart cap, but the practicality that this offers probably outweighs that, because we can do so many other things with it. So I'm still on the fence, but I'm leaning more towards just keeping this set up as it is now, just because we've got it and it works so incredibly well. Now with the fridge, now that I've got the actual tub rack on, I can actually move this fridge back, I've discovered. So it actually slides back in the floor, which is what I've had to do on a few trips. And you can actually still open this up without it pulling the floor up. So what I'm actually going to do is make an infill section that goes in the back there, just to fill that in. And we've had to do it a few times where we've had stuff stashed in behind. And I've got a few other things I'm looking at with water tanks and stuff like that. Because if I put this back in and we use this as our camping setup, the one thing we're missing that we noticed when we did a trip late last year with the rooftop tent and a few swags is the water. So I've got a few tank options that I'm going to detail down the track to fit in under the roller shutter down the back. And we're going to set up a bit of a water system that goes primarily in the back of the tub, so we can be self-contained. I've set up 2 tubs with our camping gear in as another little macro setup, and it does work incredibly well. So I'll do a future video on that down the track once I've got a few other little bits set up, and we'll go through how we actually use this for a remote weekend away without the caravan or anything like that. The fridge pretty much lives in the back of the ute now, because we find we use it in all sorts of circumstances rather than just storing it in the shed, putting it in when we're doing a camping trip. We actually use it a lot more than what we used our other fridge with the Pajero, just because it's built in like this and it works so incredibly well. You can still stash all your school bags, bits and pieces in the back here, still put suitcases in if you're doing a trip away. The fridge is just a convenient thing to have in there. Now, if I just swing you around a little bit here, the one thing that Matt's done at Triple M Tub Racks is he's actually updated how the back of the rack actually fastens and fixes on to the back of the ute tub. So he's got an updated little click thing there that replaces these turn knobs that go in, and that will actually be an update that I buy for him or get him to send down to me over the next few weeks, because I actually like that. I think that's a really good idea. It just means you don't have to worry about, undoing these turn knobs to secure it in. The other thing that I came across when I had the rooftop tent on, I should have actually had this back a little bit. I do have a few little rub marks on the rail here, but I'll cover that with the adaptation video that I've done for the rooftop tent onto this rack if I make a video of it down the track. But all in all, this setup here has actually worked far better than I ever expected. And so that just about wraps up our medium-term review of the Next Gen Ranger. Do we regret the purchase? Absolutely not. It's pretty much done everything that we set out to achieve with this in the short to medium term. And while it'd be nice to have a gnarly, really souped up ute that, looks the part and does everything you need it to do, we've discovered along the way that what we really want to do with this is actually set it up as an outback tourer. I think what I actually want to do is get something like a GU or a GQ Patrol. I've even been looking at Jeeps and Jeep Wranglers and stuff like that, and have a more cheap off-road vehicle that we can go out and have some fun with. This one here will upgrade the suspension, the wheels and tyres, all that sort of thing, but we won't go crazy with it, to the point where I might put a snorkel on it, I might not. The one thing to note with the V6s, if you put a stainless snorkel kit on them, they are extremely loud. The induction noise is quite annoying because it's on the driver's side. So that's another thing I'll add in there. But I think the idea would be to get another vehicle that you can be a little bit rough and tumble with. Something that you can buy some cheap secondhand parts with, and we might do a budget build with that goes hand in hand with our budget camper trailer build as well. So overall, it does exactly what we need for now. We just need to make some minor improvements here and there for some additional off-road capability without going too crazy. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it actually addresses some of the questions that people had, particularly with the rear tray. I think a lot of people don't understand that the flexibility and practicality plays an important part with us. We like to have something that serves multiple purposes, and for now that works extremely well. And so far, fingers crossed, it's been an extremely reliable vehicle. We haven't had any of the gremlins or issues that people have talked about in a lot of the Facebook groups, and that's where I mentioned when we bought this, just be wary of those Facebook groups because you'll see all the negativity. You'll never see the positivity, which is what I wanted to cover in portions of this video, while also addressing some of the other little issues that you need to be aware of, particularly if you're looking at a secondhand model. You can have a closer look at some of these things and see if they've got those issues, and at least bring that up with the person selling it or the dealer if you need to get them fixed or rectified somewhere down the track. And now I know I've been talking a little bit too much, and I was trying to keep this video fairly compact. So I'm going to wrap it up here. If you enjoyed the video, please give us a like, put a few comments down below. I'll try to actually answer them. And more importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. So I really hope you enjoyed this. And as I always say, thanks for watching. Get out there, stay safe, have fun, and we'll catch you next time.